Rain hammered the empty highway like a warning, and Mark didn't know that the choice he was about to make. Pulling his rusted pickup onto the shoulder instead of driving home to his sleeping daughter would rewrite his entire life before sunrise. His phone buzzed with a school reminder he'd missed paying. His fuel light blinked angrily, and yet there she was. A luxury sedan stranded in the dark, hazard lights flickering like a silent plea. Mark almost kept driving. Almost. But something about the loneliness of that car, mirroring his own, forced his hands to turn the wheel. He didn't know that the woman standing beside it, soaked and shaking, carried a secret worth billions, or that this broken engine would bind their fates in a way neither could escape. Mark Keller had learned how to survive on very little since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, leaving him alone with a 5-year-old girl named Lily and a mountain of unpaid bills. He worked days at a warehouse and nights fixing cars for neighbors who couldn't afford a mechanic, not because it paid well, but because it made him feel useful in a world that had taken almost everything from him. That night, after a 14-hour shift, his hands ached and his eyes burned, but when he stepped out into the rain to help the stranger, he did it without asking her name, without asking for money, without even thinking twice. The woman, Eleanor, watched him with quiet disbelief as he worked under the hood with a broken flashlight and tools older than his grief. She tried to offer cash, apologizing over and over, but Mark gently refused, explaining that his daughter was waiting at home and kindness was cheaper than regret. As the engine coughed back to life, Eleanor's composure cracked. She asked why he would help someone he didn't know, especially when he clearly had so little. Mark shrugged, wiping grease onto his already ruined jacket, and said something that would echo in her mind all night. Because someday my daughter might need a stranger to stop. They parted ways under the rain-soaked glow of headlights, Eleanor driving off with gratitude and curiosity. Mark returning to his quiet house where Lily slept clutching a stuffed bear, unaware that her father's simple act had just crossed paths with destiny. What Mark didn't know was that Eleanor was not just a stranded motorist. She was Eleanor Whitmore, founder of a global technology empire, a woman whose wealth isolated her more than it protected her. That night, after reaching her estate, she sat alone in a vast dining room, unable to eat, replaying the image of a man who refused her money but spoke of his child with reverence and hope. Eleanor had no family left, no children, and her doctors had recently given her a diagnosis she could not outrun with money. As the storm passed outside, she made a decision that shocked even herself. She called her lawyer, her voice steady but her hands trembling, and asked him to prepare documents that would change everything. Meanwhile, Mark slept restlessly, dreaming of engines that wouldn't start and doors that wouldn't open, unaware that somewhere across the city, his name was being spoken in rooms he'd never imagined entering. Morning came with no warning. Mark was pouring cereal for Lily when a black car stopped outside their small house. Men in tailored suits stepped out, and before Mark could panic, Eleanor herself appeared at the door, no longer drenched or helpless, but calm, composed, and strangely nervous. Lily peeked from behind her father's leg as Eleanor knelt to her level and thanked her for sharing her dad with a stranger the night before. Inside the cramped living room, Eleanor explained everything. Her illness, her loneliness, and her decision to name Mark as her heir. Not for her money, but for her values. Mark laughed at first, convinced this was some kind of mistake. But when the legal documents were placed on the table, the weight of reality crushed the air from his chest. He tried to refuse, insisting he was unworthy, that others needed it more. Eleanor listened, then told him softly that wealth without humanity was emptiness, and that he had reminded her what kind of legacy truly mattered. She didn't ask him to become rich. She asked him to remain who he already was. The days that followed tested Mark more than poverty ever had. The media circled, old friends resurfaced, and suspicion followed every step he took. Yet through it all, Lily remained his compass, asking simple questions that cut through the noise, reminding him that money didn't change bedtime stories or scraped knees. When Eleanor passed away peacefully weeks later, Mark stood at her funeral not as a beneficiary, but as a promise kept. He used the inheritance not to escape his old life, but to transform others, opening community repair shops, funding schools, and creating programs for single parents who, like him, just needed one chance. On the anniversary of that rainy night, Mark and Lily stood on the same highway shoulder, helping a stranded family change a tire. As cars rushed past, Lily smiled and asked if this was how miracles began. Mark kissed her forehead and answered with quiet certainty that miracles weren't sudden gifts from the sky, they were choices made when no one was watching. And somewhere, in the echo of a fixed engine and a life forever changed, the world felt just a little more humane.